Alpha's feral son bit everyone, except the scarred Omega he followed everywhere. The northern kingdom of Virelune was built from stone and silence. Tall black walls circled the capital like a warning, and beyond them stretched forests that never fully slept. People said the land itself remembered old magic, old blood, and old mistakes. The throne of Virelune had been strong for generations, ruled by alpha kings who believed control was the highest form of order. But even kings could not control everything. The Alpha King's only son was proof of that truth. The boy had been born during a storm that split the sky. Thunder cracked so loudly that servants dropped to their knees, believing the gods were angry. When the child cried for the first time, wolves howled from the mountains as if answering him. The court magicians whispered among themselves, fear hiding behind their calm faces. They were right to fear him. From childhood, the prince showed signs no one could ignore. His strength came too early. His temper rose too fast. When fear touched him, his teeth bared like an animal's. By the time he was 10, he had bitten a guard who tried to restrain him during a panic. By 15, chains were used more often than words. The people of Virelune stopped calling him by his name. They called him Feral. He lived in the western wing of the fortress, far from music, laughter, and light. Stone halls echoed with his restless steps. Windows were barred. Doors were reinforced with iron. The Alpha King visited rarely, always with soldiers, always with cold eyes full of shame and anger. The king told himself this was mercy. Others knew it was fear. The curse was never spoken of openly, but everyone knew it existed. Old texts described a punishment placed on royal blood long ago, meant to break a future ruler who might refuse obedience to ancient law. The curse twisted instinct, turning protection into violence, loyalty into madness. The prince was not evil. He was trapped. When he lost control, he did not understand what he did. Afterwards, he would sit in silence, shaking, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. No one stayed long enough to see that part. They only remembered the teeth, the blood, the terror. So when word spread that a scarred Omega had arrived at the fortress gates, no one imagined it would change anything. The Omega came from the south, from a territory destroyed by war and betrayal. They wore plain clothing and carried nothing of value. Their face bore old scars, thin lines across the cheek and jaw, marks of survival rather than weakness. Their eyes were steady, tired, and quiet. They had lost everything already. That was why the Alpha King allowed them entry. Virelune always needed servants. And broken people rarely caused trouble. On the day the Omega arrived, the feral prince was restless. He paced his chamber like a caged storm, fingers scraping stone, breath uneven. The moon was rising early, pale and heavy in the sky. Guards shifted nervously outside his door. Then something changed. The prince stopped. His head lifted slowly as if he had heard a sound no one else could hear. His breathing slowed. His shoulders relaxed just slightly. The guards exchanged confused looks. Moments later, down in the lower halls, the Omega crossed the threshold of the fortress. The air felt colder there, thicker, as if the walls were watching. They paused, sensing something heavy in the distance, though they could not explain why. Their eyes lifted. Far above, behind layers of stone and iron, something stirred. That night, the prince did not sleep. He pressed his forehead against the cold door, listening. His instincts pulled him forward, not in hunger or rage, but in quiet need. When a guard passed, the prince did not attack. He simply followed the sound of footsteps until they faded. The next morning, something impossible happened. During the Omega's first walk through the inner courtyard, escorted by a matron, a shadow appeared on the high balcony above. The feral prince stood there, unchained, watched closely by soldiers ready to strike. The moment his eyes met the Omega's, the world seemed to pause. The Omega felt it like a sudden stillness in the chest. Not fear, not comfort, something deeper, something old. The prince leaned forward, gripping the stone railing. His eyes wild, sharp, and broken, locked onto the Omega and refused to let go. Gasps spread through the courtyard. "He will jump," someone whispered. "He will attack," said another, but he did neither, he only watched. From that day on, the prince followed the Omega everywhere, not openly, not closely, always at a distance. A shadow at the edge of halls, a presence behind doors. Guards tried to block him, but he growled low and backed away, not striking, only warning. The Omega noticed first. They felt eyes on them while scrubbing floors, heard footsteps pause outside their chamber at night. Once, when they dropped a tray in the corridor and froze, expecting punishment, a large hand appeared beside them, steady, silent, helping lift the fallen dish. They looked up. The feral prince stood there, breathing slow, eyes careful, as if afraid of frightening them. They did not scream. They did not run. That was when the bond truly began. The court did not understand it. The Alpha King certainly did not accept it. He ordered more chains, more guards, more distance. But the prince refused to bite the Omega. He refused to harm them. When anger rose, he turned away instead. When panic struck, he searched for their voice, not blood. Slowly, painfully, control returned in small moments. The Omega spoke to him softly, never commanding, never fearing. They spoke of weather, of broken places, of survival. They did not ask his name. They did not demand change. They simply stayed. This frightened the Alpha King more than violence ever had. If the feral prince could choose, then he could defy. Whispers spread through Werewolf. Some called the Omega cursed, others called them blessed. Old women crossed themselves when they passed. Soldiers watched with uneasy respect. And the prince, he followed. On the night the moon turned red, a sign of old magic, the fortress trembled with tension. The curse stirred violently, as if sensing danger. Guards tightened their hold. The Alpha King prepared rituals meant to strengthen control. The Omega walked alone through the outer courtyard, feeling a strange heaviness in the air. Behind them, iron doors burst open. The feral prince emerged, eyes glowing with pain and power, breath shaking, chains falling broken at his feet. Soldiers shouted. Weapons rose. The Omega turned. For a moment it seemed the curse would win. Then the prince stopped. Slowly, carefully, he walked toward the Omega and lowered himself to his knees on the cold stone. His head bowed, forehead touching the ground before them, not in fear, but in trust. The courtyard fell silent. The Alpha King watched from above, heart pounding, as his son chose something he had never been allowed to choose before. Not rage, not obedience, but devotion. And in that silence, destiny shifted. The sun rose pale over Werewolf, casting long shadows across the fortress walls. The wind whispered through empty courtyards, carrying rumors and fear. Inside the western wing, the feral prince sat on the cold stone floor, staring at the broken chains beside him. He had not moved since the night of the red moon. His breaths were slow, his eyes distant, fixed on something far beyond the walls. The Omega was downstairs, tending to the morning chores. They moved quietly, their hands steady despite the tension that clung to the air. They sensed the weight of many eyes upon them. Soldiers lingered nearby, watching every motion, every pause. They knew the prince was following, even if he could not be seen. The palace walls themselves seemed to hum with the presence of something unnatural. The prince had begun to change in subtle ways. His violence no longer surfaced at every slight. His anger, though still sharp and dangerous, was held back with effort. Guards who had once been bitten or thrown aside now noticed his hesitation, his pause, his strange restraint. But only the Omega saw the true difference. They saw the moments when the prince's gaze softened, when his breath slowed at the sound of their voice, when his fingers twitched not for attack but for guidance. At first, the Omega had been cautious. They had lived a life built on survival. Trust came slowly like a drop of water on dry stone, but the prince's attention was relentless. He followed without imposing. He protected without demanding. His presence was a quiet warning to the world. Harm them, and you will answer to me." Yet the prince did not use that power to frighten. He used it to guard. The day passed in uneasy silence. In the palace courtyard, the Omega stopped by a small fountain, its water clear and cold. They knelt to touch the surface, letting the ripples spread. Behind them, a shadow fell across the marble stones. The prince appeared without sound, his steps as light as the wind. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost hesitant. "You should not be here alone," he said. The Omega did not startle. "I am not afraid," they answered quietly. He tilted his head, studying them. "No, not fear, but something else, something you do not say aloud." They looked at him with steady eyes. "I have learned to survive without words." He nodded, understanding more than he could explain. "I am not like others," he said. "I bite. I strike, I break, but with you I do not. I do not know why." The Omega smiled faintly, a small gesture that lit the shadows around them. "Perhaps because I do not ask you to be what you are not." For a long moment they simply watched each other. The world fell away, the walls, the guards, the whispers. Only the prince and the Omega existed in that quiet space, a fragile bond forming between fear and trust, between strength and understanding. But the castle would not allow peace to linger. Word of the prince's unusual behavior had spread quickly. The Alpha King summoned his council in the grand hall, their faces drawn tight with worry. Advisors muttered about curses, prophecy, and disobedience. Soldiers worried about loyalty, whispering that the prince's restraint was only temporary, that the beast inside him would one day awaken and destroy everything. The king himself stood tall, a figure carved from stone and pride. His gaze was sharp, falling on the pharaoh prince's chambers. "He follows that Omega," he said, voice heavy with anger. "He does not obey. The curse grows weaker, and with it our control." The chief advisor stepped forward. "Sire, the curse is our safeguard. Without it, the prince may become uncontrollable. That Omega, they are dangerous, whether they know it or not. They should be removed." The king's fists clenched. "No, do not touch them yet. We must understand what is happening. If the prince can be swayed, then all that we have built is at risk." Back in the western wing, the prince and the Omega spent the afternoon walking the corridors. The prince's steps were careful, measured, as if he feared he might snap at any moment. The Omega moved beside him, calm, guiding, speaking in tones that could soothe even the wildest storm. "You do not have to be alone," the Omega said, looking up at him. "Even if they fear you, even if the walls do not forgive you, you are not alone." The prince's eyes, usually wild and untamed, softened. For a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to hope. He imagined a world beyond the fortress walls where he could walk without chains, where his strength could protect, not terrorize. But the shadows in the halls reminded him of reality, and doubt returned, like a cold wind that bites through stone. That evening, the first true test of their bond arrived. A group of palace guards, led by a captain known for his brutality, came to escort the Omega away. The king's orders were clear: separate the prince and the Omega before the bond became stronger. The captain stepped into the courtyard where the Omega was working, his boots loud on the stone. "You are coming with us," he said sharply, reaching for the Omega's arm. Before they could react, the prince appeared, a shadow on the balcony above. His growl rumbled through the hall, low and terrifying. Soldiers froze. The captain raised his sword, ready for combat. The prince leaped down from the balcony, landing with a force that shook the stones. He did not attack the captain. He did not bite. He only moved to place himself between the Omega and harm, his body tense, his eyes glowing with a strange mixture of fear and protection. The captain lunged. The prince moved with impossible speed, deflecting the strike with the flat of his hand. Guards shouted, weapons raised, but the prince's presence alone was enough to freeze them. He did not strike, yet the power he radiated was undeniable. The Omega did not move. They did not scream. They simply stood, heart steady, voice calm. "Stop," they said softly. The prince froze. His gaze met theirs. The growl faded, replaced by a slow, trembling breath. For the first time he responded to command without force. He knelt before the Omega, a silent gesture of obedience, trust, and connection. The captain stepped back, uncertain. The guards hesitated, whispers spreading through the courtyard. The palace had not seen such restraint from the feral prince before. That night the fortress was alive with whispers. Servants spoke of the monster who could bite anyone but chose to kneel. Soldiers wondered if they had seen a miracle or a new danger. The Alpha King watched from above, anger and fear warring in his chest. The curse was weakening. The bond was growing. And the prophecy, the one written in old, crumbling scrolls, spoke of a day when the beast would choose love over destruction and the kingdom would tremble. Meanwhile, the prince and the Omega sat by the fountain, the night air cool against their skin. The moon reflected in the water, pale and still. The prince reached out, hesitating, then let his fingers brush against the Omega's hand. "You trust me," he whispered. "I do," they replied. "Do you trust me?" His eyes searched theirs, full of doubt and longing. I think I am learning." "Then that is enough," the Omega said. "For now it is enough." The quiet between them was comforting, fragile and fleeting. Both knew that dawn would bring new trials. Soldiers would watch. The king would command. The walls would whisper old warnings. Yet in that moment, nothing existed but the understanding that had begun to form, a bond neither curse nor fear could break entirely. But destiny had not finished its work. Late that night in the shadowed halls of the Western Wing, a figure approached the prince's chambers. It was the Alpha King himself, silent, regal, and unyielding. He had come to see the changes firsthand. He had come to test whether the bond between the feral prince and the Omega could withstand his authority. The prince stood, tense, ready to respond in instinctive violence. But the king spoke first. "You have followed this Omega," he said, voice heavy. "You have allowed yourself to feel something no prince should feel. The curse was meant to control you, to shape you into a ruler. And yet you kneel to someone who is not of your blood. Explain." The prince's jaw tightened. He did not speak immediately. Words seemed small, powerless against the storm in his chest. Finally he said, They do not command me, they do not tell me what to be, and yet I am calmer with them, I am myself." The king's eyes narrowed. "This weakness will destroy you, and it will destroy us all." "I am not weak," the prince said, voice low but firm. "I am learning, that is different." The king turned, anger and worry battling on his face. "You will see, son. The world does not forgive this. Neither will the throne." The prince sank to his knees, but this time not in fear. This time it was for the Omega, for the bond that gave him a glimpse of something beyond rage and instinct. He pressed his forehead to the cold stone, a silent vow to protect, to hold, to follow. And somewhere in the fortress, the Omega felt it. They felt the weight of eyes, of danger, of power, and yet also of devotion. They did not understand it fully, but they did not need to. Trust had begun. Hope had begun. And in a place built from fear and stone, something like love had begun as well. Outside, the wind carried whispers of prophecy and change. The red moon had passed, but its mark remained. The curse had shifted. The bond had grown. And the night held its breath, waiting for the storm yet to come. Cliffhanger. Both knew, without speaking, that the danger approaching was unlike anything they had faced, and that the kingdom, the curse, and their fragile bond would be tested more fiercely than ever. The mountains beyond Werewolf were not silent. Horns echoed across the jagged peaks, carried by winds that smelled of cold and stone. The fortress trembled slightly, though the walls had withstood centuries of storms. Within the Western Wing, the feral prince paced. His eyes were dark with worry, his teeth clenched. The Omega watched him from the fountain, hands folded in calm, though their heart beat faster than they admitted. "They come," the prince said quietly, his voice low, almost a growl. "Something moves from the mountains. It is not soldiers, not merchants, something older." The Omega's eyes narrowed. Older, like what? He shook his head. I do not know, but I feel it, and I know it is dangerous. They stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. Then we face it together, they said. You and I, not as beast and survivor, not as prince and outcast. Together, the prince's chest rose and fell rapidly. The word together felt strange, heavy, and yet comforting. For the first time, he allowed himself to hope that he could survive something that was coming, because he would not be alone. The Alpha King had convened his council again, this time with urgency. Rumors of the distant horn had spread, and advisors whispered of rebellion, monsters, and old magic awakening. The king's face was pale beneath the torchlight, his lips pressed tight. Send scouts, he ordered. Bring word of what moves in the mountains. If there is danger, it must be known before it reaches the walls. The council nodded. Soldiers prepared to ride, gathering swords and shields, their armor clanking in anticipation. But the king's gaze fell on his son. The feral prince had been quiet for days, no bites, no sudden attacks, only a strange intensity that made soldiers and advisors uneasy. You will stay here, the king commanded. No one may approach you. You are unpredictable. The prince did not argue. He only bowed slightly, though his mind raced with unease. He knew the Omega would not be allowed near him, and the thought of separation burned in his chest like fire. That night, the winds brought a smell of smoke and stone. The prince could not sleep. He prowled the halls, his senses alert, ears straining for any sound. The Omega was upstairs in their chambers, reading old scrolls the palace had provided. They did not look up when he entered quietly, instead continuing to study the pages, fingers tracing the faded letters. You are restless, the Omega said softly. I smell something, he replied. Something unnatural. I cannot tell if it is friend or foe, alive or spirit, but it comes and it will reach us soon. The Omega folded the scroll, closing the ancient words with care. Then we must prepare, together. For hours they walked the empty corridors, the prince keeping close to the Omega, their steps quiet, careful. He did not strike, he did not growl, he did not bite. Only followed, protective, yet aware that his instincts might betray him if danger came too quickly. The Omega spoke little, only occasionally guiding him with a hand on his arm, a touch that was gentle, calming, steady. It was late when the first sounds of the intruders reached the western wing. Low growls, distant but deliberate, echoed through the halls. The prince froze, muscles coiled, teeth bared, not in rage but readiness. The Omega placed their hand on his chest, feeling his heart beat like a drum. Do not let fear control you, they said. Use it, but do not surrender to it. The prince nodded, trembling slightly. He followed them to the balcony overlooking the courtyard. There, shadows moved across the moonlit stones. Dark forms, larger than men, with shapes twisted and strange. Soldiers had gathered, swords raised, unsure what approached. Some tried to steady their nerves, others whispered prayers to gods long forgotten. The prince did not whisper. He growled softly, a low warning that vibrated through stone and air. The Omega gripped his hand, their eyes meeting his, steady, unflinching. We face this together, they said again. The first figure stepped into the light. A creature taller than a man, draped in dark fur that shimmered like smoke, eyes glowing faint amber. It was not fully human. It was not fully beast. The prince's instincts screamed at him to attack, to bite, to destroy, but he did not. Instead, he stood, tense, ready to act if needed, but waiting. The Omega's hand squeezed his. We can do this. Watch me, breathe with me. The creature moved closer, cautious, sensing the human presence in the fortress. More followed, emerging from shadows, tall, lean, and silent, eyes glimmering like stars in a dark sky. The courtyard became a stage of tension, a clash between the unknown and those who dared protect what was theirs. The prince stepped forward. His body was ready to strike, muscles taut, but his gaze remained on the Omega. He waited for a signal, for guidance. They stepped forward, voice clear and firm, words carrying through the night. You will not harm this place. You will not harm me nor him. Leave or face consequences. The creatures hesitated, tilting their heads as if understanding speech was unnecessary. The prince felt the ancient curse stir within him, a surge of anger and power that demanded action. Yet, something inside him held. Something that had grown from the quiet strength of the Omega. One of the creatures moved closer, eyes narrowing. The prince tensed, ready to strike, but before he could, the Omega raised their hand. Go, they commanded, voice firm and resonant. Leave. The lead creature paused. Then, as if recognizing a force greater than strength or rage, it slowly retreated. The others followed, melting into the shadows from which they had emerged. Silence returned, heavy, still, and full of questions. The prince sank to his knees in relief, his forehead resting on the cold stone of the balcony. He shook not from fear, but from the release of tension he had held for hours, days, months. The Omega knelt beside him, hand brushing his hair back, calm and steady. You did not strike, they said softly, even when it would have been easier, that is new. I do not know why, he admitted, voice low, trembling, but I could not hurt them, not when you are here. The Omega's hand lingered on his shoulder. It is not about me. It is about what you are choosing to be, not a beast, not a weapon, yourself. A warmth spread through him, strange and terrifying in its intensity. No one had ever said words like that to him, not his father, not the council, not the palace walls. Only this quiet, scarred Omega who survived where the world had failed them. In the days that followed, the fortress was restless. Soldiers murmured about the creatures in the mountains. The king demanded more guards, more patrols, more security. The prince was ordered to remain in his chambers, yet he ignored some of the commands. He spent long hours with the Omega, walking through halls, speaking quietly, learning small things about the fortress, about the people, about life outside chains and fear. The bond between them grew stronger. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was small gestures, a hand on an arm, a look held too long, a word of comfort. But it was real, and it frightened the Alpha King more than any enemy could. He had never seen his son choose anything over obedience, over fear, over rage. And now, the throne seemed less certain than it had for generations. One evening, the Omega led the prince to a hidden courtyard, small and overgrown with ivy and flowers that survived despite neglect. I come here sometimes, they said, when I need quiet, when I need to remember who I am. The prince knelt beside them, watching their hands brush over the petals, careful, gentle. You are strange, he said, so calm, so certain, and yet you have scars, I can see them. I know they are not just from accidents. The Omega looked at him, eyes steady. They are from survival, from being forced to live when others would have left me behind. I have learned to walk forward even when it hurts. The prince swallowed, chest tight. I wish I could be like that. Calm, certain. Not this. He gestured to his hands, to the shadows, to the curse that had defined him for years. You can, the Omega said softly. It will take time, but you can, if you choose it. The prince's eyes filled with a strange mixture of longing and fear. Choosing peace over rage, trust over instinct, was harder than anything he had faced. And yet, with the Omega beside him, it seemed possible. But fate had other plans. Late that night, when the fortress was still, a new sound reached the western wing. Footsteps, soft and deliberate, moving through the hallways with intent. The prince's ears pricked. The Omega sensed it too, their hand gripping his arm, steady but urgent. They are here, the prince whispered. Someone has entered the fortress. Quietly. They moved together through the shadows, silent and careful. In the main hall, figures emerged from the darkness. Soldiers, but not ones they recognized. They carried strange markings, symbols burned into their cloaks and armor, eyes glimmering, careful, watching. The prince stepped forward, muscles coiled. Who comes? He demanded, voice sharp, low. No answer came, only a soft, mocking laugh that echoed through the hall. The Omega's hand squeezed his. "Stay with me," they said, "no matter what happens." The lead figure stepped into the torchlight, revealing a hooded cloak and eyes that glimmered faintly. The prince felt the curse stir inside him, not in anger but in recognition. This was old magic. Something older than the mountains, older than the fortress, older than any rule the Alpha King had set. And as the figure spoke, the words cut into the silence like ice. "The bond has begun," the stranger said, voice low, echoing in shadows. "But the choice has not been made." "Soon it must be." The prince stiffened. The Omega's hand trembled slightly, and somewhere in the darkness of the fortress, destiny waited to strike. Cliffhanger. A wind swept through the hall, carrying whispers of curses, choices, and power that neither the prince nor the Omega fully understood. And in that moment, both realized that the next decision they made, together or apart, would change the fate of the kingdom forever. The fortress of Werewolf had never felt so heavy. Shadows clung to the walls like smoke, and the torches flickered as if afraid of the darkness beyond. The strange figure from the mountains had disappeared into the night, leaving behind only a warning. The bond between the feral prince and the Omega was powerful, but the choice had not yet been made. That choice would shape not just them, but the kingdom itself. The prince paced the halls, restless and tense. His fingers brushed the cold stone, but no comfort came. The Omega walked beside him, calm yet alert, their hand occasionally brushing his shoulder to steady him. Neither spoke much because the silence carried weight. Every corner, every shadow seemed alive with possibility and threat. "I do not like this," the prince said at last, voice low, a growl hiding beneath the words. "I feel the curse stronger than before. It whispers. It reminds me what I am capable of." The Omega stopped, facing him. "And yet you are holding it back," they said softly. "You have not bitten, not struck, not destroyed. You are choosing yourself, choosing me, choosing something better. That is strength, not weakness." The prince's eyes glimmered with doubt. "But the king, the throne, everything I was born into, it tells me I am only a weapon. It says I am danger, that I will destroy everything if I cannot follow the curse." The Omega reached out, placing their hand on his chest. "Then let the curse test us together. Let the world see that we do not need fear to rule our fate. You are not alone anymore." The words sank into him. For the first time, he allowed himself to breathe fully. The weight of centuries of curses and prophecy pressed against his chest, but for the first time he felt like he could carry it, because he was not carrying it alone. Dawn approached. The first pale light slipped into the halls, brushing against stone and shadow. But the fortress did not feel safe. From the mountains came distant roars, echoes of creatures older than memory, moving closer with purpose. Scouts had returned hours earlier, breathless and fearful, describing beings that walked like humans but carried the power of the old magic. The Alpha King summoned the council immediately, demanding action. His face was drawn, pale, hands trembling slightly as he spoke. "This is the moment we have feared. Our walls will not hold them. Our soldiers will not suffice. The curse my son bears may yet save us or destroy us." The council murmured uneasily. The palace was alive with tension, fear mingling with awe. And somewhere in the fortress, the feral prince prepared. He had made a decision. He would not fight alone. The Omega stood with him as they approached the western gate, the first sunlight glinting off worn stone. Soldiers and guards parted instinctively, sensing the power emanating from him. His body was tense, ready yet restrained. His teeth gleamed faintly in the sunlight, but there was no anger, only focus, only protection. "Are you ready?" the Omega asked, their hand brushing against his, grounding him. He nodded, eyes sharp. "As ready as I will ever be. Let them come. Let the curse test us. I will not falter." From the mountains, the first of the creatures appeared. Dark, tall, with glowing eyes and silent, deliberate steps. They stopped at the edge of the valley, sensing the prince and the Omega, the fortress and the tension that filled the air. A low roar rose from them, vibrating through the stones. Soldiers shivered. Horses reared. Torches flickered violently. The prince stepped forward, placing himself in front of the Omega. "Do not fear," he said, voice low but firm. "I will protect you. We face this together." The creatures advanced. Not slowly but with caution, recognizing power in the prince that surpassed rage. The curse inside him stirred, whispering, tempting him to release it fully. He could feel the sharpness of teeth, the surge of strength, the hunger for violence. And yet he held it back. The Omega spoke, calm and steady, words that cut through the storm in his mind. "Remember who you are, remember what you choose. You are not the curse, you are stronger than it." The prince's teeth retracted. His body, though powerful and ready to strike, relaxed slightly. He had the strength to destroy them all, but he chose not to. He would not allow instinct to rule. He would choose. The creatures paused, sensing the shift. Something in their ancient minds recognized that the prince's power was not just raw strength, but something new: discipline, restraint, and bond. They hesitated, uncertain, before finally bowing slightly and retreating. A hush fell over the valley. Soldiers lowered swords. Horses calmed. The fortress seemed to exhale after holding its breath for centuries. The prince sank to his knees beside the Omega, forehead resting on the stone as he had so many nights before, but this time it was different. He was not bowed in fear or guilt. He was grounded, present, alive. The Omega's hand rested on his back, steadying, comforting, proud. "You did it," they said softly. "You chose yourself, and you chose me." The prince looked up, eyes shining with a mix of relief, awe, and something deeper, something he could not yet name. I did not know I could." "You could," the Omega said. "You just needed to see that someone believed in you. That someone trusted you, not as a monster, but as yourself." News of the event spread quickly. Soldiers and servants whispered of the prince who could bite anyone yet chose to kneel. They spoke of the Omega who calmed him, who stood firm when the world shook. Even the Alpha King could not deny the power of what had been done. Yet the choice had consequences. The king knew the throne could not remain the same. His son, though still a prince, had shown that fear alone did not command loyalty. He had shown that love, trust, and bond could wield a power far greater than threats, chains, or curses. The king called the prince to the council chamber. Soldiers and advisors crowded the room, eyes sharp, waiting to see how he would respond. The Alpha King's voice was quiet but firm. "You have changed," he said, looking at his son. "The curse, the bloodline, the rules, they no longer define you. You have chosen differently. What does that mean for the kingdom?" The prince stood, shoulders squared, eyes bright. "It means that fear will no longer rule here. It means the throne must be more than chains and obedience. It means that I will protect the people and I will protect the Omega. Not because I must, but because I choose to." The council was silent. The king's face softened, though with hesitation. He had ruled with order, with control for decades, but he could see that his son's choice was real, and that it had power that no sword, chain, or curse could match. The Omega stepped forward, standing beside the prince. "And I will stand with him," they said. "Not as servant, not as subject, but as partner. Together we face the kingdom, the curse, and whatever comes next." The room held its breath. Then, slowly, murmurs began, some skeptical, some hopeful. Soldiers nodded. Advisors whispered prayers, and the king, after a long moment, finally inclined his head. "Then let it be so," he said. "Let the throne and the kingdom see that strength comes not from fear, but from choice." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scents of mountains, forests, and old magic. The sun rose higher, painting the fortress in light. The shadows of the curse remained, faint, whispering, but they no longer ruled. The prince and the Omega walked through the halls, side by side. For the first time, the prince did not pace. He did not growl. He did not hide. He was free, not from the curse entirely, for it was a part of him, but free from its control. The Omega smiled at him, a quiet, steady light. "You have learned," they said. You have chosen. The prince nodded, feeling the bond between them stronger than any fear, stronger than any instinct, stronger than any curse. And I will continue to choose, he said. Every day I will choose myself, I will choose you, and I will choose the world we protect together. In the months that followed, the kingdom of Virelun changed. The people, once ruled by fear, learned that the son of the Alpha King could be powerful without being cruel. Soldiers learned that loyalty could come from trust, not obedience. And the fortress, once a place of shadows and chains, became a place of cautious hope. The prince and the Omega, side by side, walked through the gardens, the halls, and the outer walls. They laughed quietly, spoke softly, and shared the kind of bond that could not be broken by prophecy, curse, or fear. And somewhere in the distant mountains, the creatures that had tested them watched from afar, sensing the change. They did not attack again. They did not roar. They simply observed, as if recognizing that the future had shifted. The feral prince, once feared and hated, now stood tall. Not as a weapon, not as a monster, not as a curse, but as a protector, a partner, and a man who had chosen to rise above instinct, rage, and fear. The Omega, scarred but unbroken, walked beside him. Together they had faced darkness, magic, and prophecy. Together they had survived. Together they had changed the fate of a kingdom. And as the sun set over Virelun, painting the fortress walls gold and crimson, the prince pressed his forehead to the Omega's hand. No words were needed. The bond they shared spoke louder than anything else, a promise of trust, devotion, and a future built not on fear, but on choice. Legends would be told for centuries of the feral prince who bit everyone, except the one who followed him everywhere. And of the Omega who tamed a monster, not with chains or force, but with calm courage and quiet love. The kingdom had survived. The curse had been faced. And for the first time the night was quiet, the shadows harmless, and the hearts of two chosen souls full of hope.